Hey guys, what's going on? I am back with another video, and this video is how to use your DSLR. So whether or not you just got your DSLR or you've had yours for a while and want to learn more about it, this is a guide from me, a beginner, to you guys on how to more effectively use your camera. This is going to be the first part in a series, and I'm going to continue this with different sections highlighting different things, giving you information on how to improve certain aspects of your photos and videos. For these videos, we're going to be using manual mode. Now, most cameras should have a fully manual mode where you can control the shutter speed, frame rate, ISO, and all that stuff. You just have to fiddle around in your settings and find it somewhere. I know Canon has it, Nikon has it, Sony has it. Just, you have to go into your settings and find the manual mode. For today's video, we're going to be starting with shutter speed. Shutter speed refers to how fast your shutter closes. It's that little like click noise that you hear when you press the take the picture button. It goes tsk. That's the shutter. A slow shutter speed basically means that the shutter will stay open for that long. A shutter speed of 1 second means that the camera's shutter will stay open for, you guessed it, 1 second. Now this allows more light to be let in, but also allows for more motion blur because the shutter is open longer. The far end example of this is if you wanted to take long exposure shots and take pictures of the stars and, you know, see all the stars in the night sky and stuff like that. This is what you would use. You would keep the shutter open longer to allow more light in it, and then it picks up all the little stars in the sky. On the other end, however, a faster shutter speed means that the shutter closes and opens faster. A shutter speed of 1/125 is 1/125th of a second. That's how quickly it closes. It makes the images darker, so there's less light being let into the shutter because it's so quick, but it also results in photos with less motion blur. Another example of this would be if you're a sports photographer, you're out on the field trying to take photos, you raise the shutter speed and you take lots of photos and you capture that instant, that one moment, no motion blur of whatever's going on the field. Each of these are better for different situations. One hand, you know, scenery, night sky and stuff like that. The other hand, sports photography, instant photos. It all really depends on what kind of image you're aiming for, but I would suggest you take your camera and you just play around with it and see what works for you. The best way to learn about your camera is to play around, take photos, and fiddle with all your settings. Now let's move on to the video aspect of shutter speed and what that entails. So for video, there's the 180-degree rule. There's two versions of it, actually. The first version refers to camera placement and dialogue and stuff like that. We will probably talk about that in a later video, but for this video, it's the 180-degree shutter rule. So the 180-degree shutter speed rule refers to shutter speed and motion blur. This rule is pretty simple. It's just whatever your frame rate is, you double the shutter speed for that in order to compensate. We will discuss frame rate and all the other aspects of this later, but for now we're just going to focus purely on the shutter speed. So the rule is implemented because we want to have proper motion blur, especially if we are making a movie and we want to really immerse our audience in this world that we're creating for them. So that's why we have that proper motion blur. What I mean by that is our eyes actually see natural motion blur. And if you take your hand and you wave it in front of your face, like John Cena, there's a natural motion blur, right? So if you're looking at it right now, it's not completely clear. There's a blurriness to it when you move your hand. The faster you move it, the blurrier it becomes, right? All that is just natural motion blur that your eye recognizes. So we want to replicate this with the 180-degree shutter rule. And so through the course of all of filmmaking history, what they've come to realize is that in order to get natural motion blur, you just have to have double your frame rate. So for this particular video that you're watching right now, we're shooting at 24 frames a second and we have a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. This particular camera doesn't have a 48th of a second shutter speed, so we're compensating by just rounding up to 50th of a second. So 24 frames, 48, whatever, 50, you know. And this results in the most natural motion blur for 24 frames. Let's say we didn't shoot in 24 frames. If we wanted to shoot in 30 frames a second, then our shutter speed would be 1/60th of a second. If we shot in 60 frames a second, it would be 1/120th of a second. If we don't double the shutter speed properly, this is the result. Right now, we're still shooting at 24 frames a second, but here's the thing. We are at 400th of a second shutter speed. and because of that, the image ended up getting darker, so I had to compensate the digital light in the camera, not lighting in the room, but I had to compensate with the digital light in the camera, called the ISO, in order to make it brighter. We'll talk about ISO in a later video, but this is what it looks like, and the frame rate is still 24, but the shutter speed's kind of different. You notice it? And now we are shooting with 1/10 of the shutter speed. Still the same frame rate, but also I had to compensate by lowering the digital light in the camera because of the fact that the shutter speed is now slower, so it allows more light in, so I had to drop the ISO. It looks weird and it's kind of choppy, isn't it? It's almost it's almost unnatural. So this is actually really cool for like some sort of dream sequence effect, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening, ooh. That was a little off-putting, wouldn't you say? It's really weird to see these different shutter speeds because our eye is so accustomed to a certain motion blur, but don't worry, everything is reset back to normal now, so movement and motion blur is all good. No weird choppiness or no weird moving too quickly sort of thing. An important thing to note is that when people say that they're shooting with a shutter speed of 50, that means that they're shooting with 1/50th of a second and not 50-second shutter speed. Because 1/50th of a second for 24 frames looks like this, and then I don't even know what 50-second shutter speed looks like. I don't even know if I can access it on my cameras. Just know that 1 over whatever number they're mentioning. That's the rule for it. It will really affect the way your video comes out. You may have noticed that, like I said, during the very slow shutter speed section of 1/10 of a second, it almost looked like a dream sequence kind of state where everything looked slow and choppy, right? So these rules aren't exact. You don't have to be like, oh, you have to follow this for every single thing that you do. No, it's more of a guideline actually. It depends on what visual style you're aiming for. If you want that slow shutter speed for a certain sequence, go for it. If you want a fast shutter speed for a different sequence, go for it. It just all depends on what you as a creator want to make with your style. You may want to make it look blurrier, or you may want to make it look sharper depending on whatever shutter speed you make. I'm only giving you the tools you need to craft. It's up to you, the artist, to build something amazing with those tools. The next video I'll have for you will be discussing frame rate, so stay tuned for that. If you guys have any questions related to shutter speed or any of the content on my channel, feel free to leave it in the comments below and I will get back to you and try to answer your questions as best as I can. And if you guys like the video, like it, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and I will catch you guys in the next tutorial video. Peace out.